What we have today is a rarity for this channel, a dual unboxing. On the left, we have a Univox drum machine from 1976, and on the right, we have a brand new drum machine called Step. Pollyann reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do a video about the Step, and I suggested that it might be fun to pair it with a vintage drum machine from the mid-70s. So here we are. I don't really know anything about either one of these, so hopefully we're gonna learn about them together. Before we look at this exciting new product, let's look at this exciting old product. I think it's only gonna take about 20 seconds to describe how it works. We turn it on with the volume knob. This is the button for starting the beat. And if we don't like this beat, we can change to another one using these buttons. And that's it. This is a pretty standard drum machine for 1976. It's got a bunch of preset patterns, you can't change them, and you also can't change the sounds that the patterns are made up of. Still, pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna do some more research, I'm gonna sample this, and in the meantime, let's take a look at the Step. I'm gonna peel this screen protector off. So the first thing you'll notice about this thing is it's a pedal. This product is really meant for guitarists or keyboardists, and specifically people who play live. As you can see, there are 3 foot switches to start and stop beats, to apply effects, as well as to transition into the next pattern in your song. I can use this knob to change the beat. There are seemingly hundreds of pre-made beats. And I can use this knob to change the sound palette. As you can hear, it's the same beat as before, but with different sounds. Unlike the Univox, this drum machine is based entirely on samples. You can also create your own pattern or use your own samples, both of which I'm going to learn how to do in a little bit. But first, I want to see what happens if I try to combine the sounds of the Step with the drum machine from 1976. One complication, of course, is they both have to be playing at the same speed. Well, the Step has both USB and MIDI for syncing things up. The Univox doesn't have any kind of external sync input. All we have is this tempo knob. The best we can do is try to get pretty close and then use the tap tempo feature on the Step to get them in sync. Here's what the 2 drum machines sound like together. I actually really like that. Admittedly, most of the sound is actually coming from the Step, but the Univox is adding a little bit of spice to the mix. Speaking of which, let's turn off the Univox and focus back on the Step. Each of these buttons here corresponds to a different pattern within a song. And I've just selected a blank one. Let's try making our own pattern. Each of these 4 buttons on the side seems to correspond to a different instrument. Okay, got some bass drum hits. I think there's going to be a snare drum, sort of. Let's make that bass drum rhythm a little more interesting. Maybe add a second snare, not to be too predictable or anything, but next we'll add some hats. Those sound pretty dry and mechanical. I'm going to see if I can introduce some variation into them. Okay, so this is just like the Pollyann Play. Basically, you have control over each note that sounds. They can have different pitches or they can be panned differently. There seems to be a whole host of different parameters you can mess with on a note-per-note basis. Okay, maybe let's go back to the previous pattern we had. Okay, let's add a bass line. Even though this is a drum machine, there's nothing to stop you from using melodic samples. I'm just going to turn the kit knob until I find a sound I like. Oh, that's close. That's even better. I'm going to lower the pitch of the note. Let's add some more notes. That's cool. I've got this one hit that's not the same note as the others. I'm going to try to apply some effects to it. Specifically, there's a randomizer. You choose an action and then you set the probability that that action will occur. In this case, the action I'm going to choose is random octave up. And then I'm going to set the chance. Basically what this means is there's a 50% chance that that one note will play an octave above. Like that. I'm also going to add a little bit of reverb on the first 2 hits. Really just to give it some variation. Now that we've got a functional beat, might be a good time to mess with some of these performance effects. I'm going to turn the effects knob Okay, and there's a whole host of effects we can choose from. Things that chop, slice, rearrange the drum hits into a different order. A lot of these are familiar to me because they're also available on the Polyend Play. Oh, I really like that one. Gives the beat a whole different feeling. The fifth up one is one of the ones I use the most on the Play. Let's bring the 70s drum machine back in. Maybe add some Micro Freak. Now that we've got some background music, let's do some research about the Univox. Of course, my first order of business is to just search for the model number. And I get a ton of hits, mostly just listings for people selling the drum machine. Unfortunately, there's not actually a lot of information about it beyond that. Another thing you can do with old gear like this is you can try to search for vintage catalogs. Let's try that. This website has a bunch of catalogs. Oh, it's separated by product. Guitars, amps, effects. There's no drum machine section. Wait, I think that's the model number. And there it is. The Cub. And up here it says Piper's Cub Rhythmer. What a baffling product name. I wonder if the term drum machine hadn't been invented yet. A compact automatic rhythmer designed to produce 10 distinctive popular rhythms with 7 selector switches. That's when you know a product doesn't have a lot of features. When the advertising copy starts bragging about the fact that there are buttons at all. Ooh, nice tip. Additional rhythmic variations are made by mixing compatible rhythms. We're gonna have to try that. Oh, and it actually lists the specific drum sounds, which is super helpful because I'm sampling it, and these synthetic drum sounds that it creates sound so little like the drums they're supposed to be imitating that I didn't know what to call them. Oh, this is important. It says, panel designed for operation on top of organ or under the keyboard. These drum machines in the 70s were geared almost exclusively to organ players. The synthesizer hadn't become a mainstream instrument yet, and a lot of people had these very 70s looking organs with wooden side panels. And if they wanted some rhythmic accompaniment, they could buy a box like this and literally screw it into the wood of the organ. It occurs to me that I don't really know anything about Univox as a company. Let's see if we can remedy that. Okay, they were based in New York. Okay, they made amplifiers, and they sold synthesizers made by Korg. What about drum machines? I'm guessing those were also made by Korg. Sometimes when I think something is true, I'll search for it as though it is true, and then see if the results convince me. And in this case, they definitely do. I'm seeing a lot of the same units being sold both as Univox and as Korg. Through one of the search results, I discovered this forum post in which somebody mentions that the drum machine I have is exactly the same as the Korg Mini Pops Jr. When I search for that, I turn up a bunch of videos, and yes, it does seem to be identical. The Mini Pops Jr. was released in 1972. According to the comments of this video, it was used by Echo and the Bunnymen in their debut single, a story I was able to corroborate from this interview they did in 1985. It was a Mini Pops Jr. It was great. The best beat ever. They even said the specific preset that they used, Rock 1. By 1972, when this was released, Korg had already been making drum machines for more than a decade. Their first ever release was this thing, called the Donkomatic DA-20. As far as I can tell, only one of these is still in existence, and it's at Korg's museum in Japan. It's actually a beautiful piece of mid-century modern furniture. Not really something you'd want to lug to a gig. In 1966, they switched from vacuum tubes to transistors, which allowed them to make portable units like the Olsen Rockmate. It's important to remember that drum machines back then had no ability to play back samples. They're essentially synthesizing these rhythmic elements using pulses and bursts of noise, which is what gives these old drum machines their distinctive sound. Speaking of which, I have sampled that distinctive sound and turned it into a decent sampler preset. I've also reconstructed the 10 beats that this thing can produce and assigned them to keys on the left-hand side so you too can party like it's 1976. Reading this interview with Echo and the Bunnymen and hearing them wax poetic about this thing, it's a bit touching. I remember being a teenager and wishing I had someone to play drums on my songs. My solution was to make beats on my computer and play along, but in the mid-70s, boxes like this were the only option. When you look out on eBay and Reverb, you see a ton of these old drum machines for sale. And it's easy to imagine all of the bedrooms and basements these units must have lived in. When I planned out this video, the premise was that I was going to be learning about two similar drum machines, separated only by a gulf of time. In fact, they were made almost exactly 50 years apart. But it's not really true that they're the same class of product. Yes, they were both designed for gigging musicians, but the drum machine from the 70s is so basic, so spare, that there's really only one way to use it. You figure out the beat you want, you start it up, and you never touch it again for the duration of your song. The step, on the other hand, is quite interactive. You can make your own patterns, you can switch between them, and you can mangle your beats in real time with effects. Another thing that makes the two machines very different is how present the legacy of electronic music is in this machine. In the mid-70s, electronic music wasn't really mainstream yet. Beatboxes from the period did their best to include a beat from each potential genre they might be used for: cha-cha, bossa nova, waltz. But nowadays, not only is electronic music popular, but it's enjoyed a complex, fragmented history that has resulted in dozens of inscrutable subgenres, many of which are represented in the Steps pre-made beats. Also worth mentioning that while patterns and samples have been provided for many different kinds of music, a lot of the tools and onboard effects are ones that will be most exciting to electronic musicians. All in all, a pretty interesting little box. I'm really excited to see how people end up using this in a live setting. Okay, I think that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video.